The family meeting happened on a hot evening in Ibadan. Everyone sat in the living room, quiet and stiff, like something heavy was about to fall. Zainab Afolayan stood near the wall, her hands folded, already knowing she didn't belong in the room the way she used to. Her father, Bamadil Afolayan, cleared his throat and started talking about inheritance, about legacy, about who had made the family proud. Each word felt sharp. When he looked at Zainab, his eyes were cold. Her mother, Marank, didn't defend her. She just sighed and looked away, as if Zainab was already a disappointment they had accepted. "You are wasting your life," her uncle said. "Others are moving forward, and you are still dreaming." Someone laughed softly. Then the word came, heavy and loud. "Failure." It sat on Zainab's chest like a stone. Zainab tried to speak. She wanted to explain, to say she was trying, that she had plans. But her father raised his hand. His voice was calm but cruel. "From today," he said, "you are no longer an Afolayan." The room went silent. Zainab felt her heart break in a way she couldn't describe. Her father walked over, took her phone from her hand, and placed it on the table. "You don't need this anymore," he said. She was led to the door like a stranger. No hugs, no goodbye, just the sound of the door closing behind her. As she stood outside, the house felt smaller, distant. That night, Zainab didn't just lose her home. She lost her last name. And with it, the only identity she had ever known. By the next morning, the story had already started spreading. In Ibadan, news doesn't travel quietly. Neighbors leaned over fences. Church members whispered after Sunday service. Zainab's name moved from mouth to mouth, changing shape each time. Her parents didn't stop it. In fact, they gave it a voice. "She lost her way," her mother told people with a sad shake of the head. "We tried everything." Her father stood tall and added, "Some children refuse guidance. When they choose a bad path, parents must protect the family name." People nodded. They believed it. It was easier to believe that Zainab had fallen than to imagine her parents pushing her out. At church, prayers were offered for her soul, not for her safety. "Let us pray for the daughter who went astray," the pastor said gently. Zainab wasn't there to hear it, but the words still reached her through messages and half-whispered calls. Old friends stopped replying. Distant relatives sent long voice notes filled with advice she never asked for. No one asked her what really happened. Zainab stayed quiet. She didn't post anything online. She didn't call anyone to explain. She knew how stories worked in her town. Once a label sticks, it doesn't peel off easily. If she spoke, they would say she was being disrespectful. If she cried, they would say she was guilty. Silence felt like the only thing she could control. So she packed a small bag before sunrise. Just clothes, a notebook, and a little money she had saved secretly. She walked past familiar houses, past streets that had watched her grow up. No one noticed her leaving. Or maybe they did and chose not to. The town that knew her full name no longer felt like home. On the bus out of Ibadan, Zainab sat by the window and watched the city fade. Her phone was gone. Her family was gone. Her reputation was being rewritten without her permission. She imagined people saying, "Did you hear about the Afolayan girl?" and shaking their heads like they knew her story. It hurt, but it also made something clear. She didn't owe them an explanation they would never believe. There were moments when she almost turned back. Moments when fear crept in and asked, "Where will you sleep? Who will stand up for you?" But another voice, quieter and stronger, answered back. "If you stay, they will keep telling your story for you. If you leave, at least your life will be yours." By the time the bus reached the edge of the city, Zainab had stopped crying. Her eyes were dry, but her chest still ached. She wasn't running away. She was stepping out of a version of herself that others had created. They could keep their story. She would build her own, far from the whispers, far from the judgment, in a place where her name meant nothing yet, and where that nothing could finally become something new. Oshodi, Lagos did not welcome Zainab with open arms. It welcomed her with noise, dust, and tired faces rushing past her like she was invisible. She slept on other people's floors, sometimes on a thin mat, sometimes on bare tiles that stole the warmth from her body. Every place came with rules. Wake up early. Don't make noise. Don't stay too long. Be grateful. She always said thank you, even when her back hurt and her heart felt heavy. During the day, she worked as a tailor's assistant. She cut fabric, stitched hems, and fixed torn clothes that reminded her of her own life, patched, stretched, and barely holding together. Customers complained over small mistakes, and the tailor blamed her loudly. Zainab smiled and said sorry, even when it wasn't her fault. She learned how to keep her face calm while her chest burned. At night, she cleaned offices and shops. Empty rooms, dirty floors, silent chairs. She wiped tables where important people had sat during the day, people who would never notice her. The smell of cleaning liquid stayed on her hands no matter how much she washed them. When her body finally stopped moving, her thoughts became loud. That was when the tears came. Quiet tears. The kind you cry into a pillow so no one hears. Sometimes, exhaustion hit her so hard she wondered if her parents were right. Maybe she really was a failure. Maybe she had left home chasing nothing. But every time that thought came, she remembered the door closing behind her in Ibadan. She remembered the way her name was taken from her like it meant nothing. That memory hurt, but it also pushed her forward. Zainab kept small pieces of paper in her bag. Old receipts, torn notebook pages, even the back of fabric labels. On them she wrote goals in shaky handwriting. Get my own room. Learn a real skill. Never beg them to accept me again. When the nights felt too long, she took those papers out and read them slowly like prayers. Sometimes she added dates. Sometimes she crossed things out and rewrote them, believing that rewriting meant she was still alive. She laughed during the day so people wouldn't ask questions. She joked with coworkers and thanked them for small favors. But when she was alone, she let herself feel everything. The anger, the shame, the fear of failing again. She missed the sound of her mother's voice before it turned cold. She missed the feeling of belonging to a family, even a broken one. Still, Ashadi taught her something Ibadan never did. No one cared about her past here. No one asked whose daughter she was. They only cared if she showed up and worked. And every night, as she lay on another floor and stared at another ceiling, Zainab promised herself this life was temporary. She wasn't sleeping on floors because she was weak. She was doing it because she was building something. Slowly, quietly, from the ground up. Sometimes, while sweeping floors late at night, Zainab's mind went back to the past. To the days when she first discovered digital marketing. It started as curiosity. She liked watching how small businesses use social media, how one good post could change everything. She talked about it at home once, with excitement in her voice. Her father laughed, not a gentle laugh, sharp one. "Is this a real job?" he asked. Her mother shook her head and said, "You spend too much time on useless things." That was the day Zainab learned that dreams sound foolish to people who don't understand them. But the interest never left her. Even in Ashadi, with tired feet and empty pockets, the idea stayed with her. One evening, she saw an online ad for a digital marketing course at a cyber cafe. It wasn't cheap for someone like her. She stared at the screen for a long time before deciding. She would try. If it failed, at least it would be her failure, not one handed to her by others. She attended classes online late at night after cleaning jobs. Sometimes she nodded off in front of the screen. Sometimes the internet cut off and she had to start again. She took notes carefully, like the knowledge was something fragile that could disappear. SEO, ads, content, analytics. Words that once sounded big and scary slowly became familiar. For the first time in a long while, her brain felt awake. Zainab practiced with fake brands, then real small ones that couldn't pay much. She sent messages to strangers online, offering help, lowering her price, even working for free at first. Many ignored her. Some said no. Each rejection hurt, but it didn't stop her. She remembered all the times her parents had dismissed her dreams. She refused to let that voice live inside her head. Then one night, an email came from someone abroad. A small business owner looking for help with social media ads. Zainab read the message again and again, afraid it would disappear. She replied slowly, carefully choosing every word. When the client agreed, her hands shook. She worked harder than she ever had, checking results, adjusting strategies, staying up late to make sure everything was perfect. 2 weeks later, the payment arrived. $500. Zainab stared at the screen, her heart racing. It was more money than she had ever made at once. She didn't scream. She didn't run outside. She just sat there, breathing, letting the moment sink in. It felt unreal, like life had quietly nodded at her and said, yes. Hope returned softly. Not loud, not proud. Just a calm feeling in her chest. The skill they laughed at was feeding her now. The dream they called useless was opening doors. Zainab folded the paper where she had once written, "Learn a real skill," and smiled to herself. She didn't need anyone's permission anymore. She was finally proving it, to herself first. The day the email arrived, Zainab was sitting at a shared desk in Yaba Tech Hub. The room was loud with keyboards, soft music, and quiet ambition. People around her talked about funding, growth, and big dreams. Zainab kept her head down, focused on her screen, still not fully believing she belonged in a place like this. To her, it already felt like a miracle to be there. Her phone buzzed. One email. She almost ignored it, thinking it was another newsletter or client question. When she saw the subject line, her heart skipped. It mentioned her startup name. She opened it slowly, then stopped halfway through. She read it again from the top. And again. And again. 5 times. Maybe more. Her mind refused to accept the words. They wanted to acquire her company. Not partner. Not test. Acquire. The number sat there quietly, bold and calm. 6 figures. Enough to change everything. Enough to erase years of sleeping on floors, of fake smiles and private tears. Zainab leaned back in her chair, her hands shaking slightly. The noise around her faded. She didn't shout. She didn't jump up. She didn't call anyone. She just breathed. Deep, slow breaths like her body needed to remember how to stay steady. Her chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something close to relief. This wasn't luck. It was proof. Quiet proof. Her mind went back to Ibadan. To the living room where her name was taken from her. To the door that closed behind her. To the nights in Oshodi when she wondered if she would ever escape survival mode. All of it lined up in her head, like a long road that finally led somewhere real. Zainab closed her laptop and walked outside for a moment. The air felt different. Lagos traffic moved like it always did, loud and impatient, but she felt separate from it. For the first time, she wasn't rushing. She wasn't scared of tomorrow. She stood there and let the feeling pass through her without fighting it. Back inside, she replied to the email with a simple message. Professional. No sign of the storm inside her. When she hit send, her fingers paused over the keyboard. She whispered a thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to the version of herself that didn't give up. She didn't celebrate because celebration felt too small. This moment wasn't about happiness. It was about release. The kind that comes when your past finally loosens its grip. Zainab packed her bag and left the hub quietly that evening. As she walked into the Lagos night, she felt lighter. Not because of money, but because life had finally answered her back. The conference hall was cold and bright, filled with people in neat clothes and confident smiles. Zainab stood backstage, holding a microphone, listening to her name being announced. Her heart beat fast, but her face stayed calm. When she walked onto the stage, the screen behind her lit up. Big clear letters. Zainab Afalayan. The surname she was once told she no longer deserved. She paused for half a second. Not because she was scared, but because the moment felt heavy. That name had been taken from her in a living room in Ibadan, like it meant nothing. Now it was glowing on a screen, in a room full of people who had paid to hear her speak. Life had a strange way of returning things. In the audience, some faces froze. Old family friends, church members, people who once whispered about a girl who lost her way. Heads leaned closer, voices dropped. "Isn't that?" someone murmured. Another replied, "Yes, that's Bamadil's daughter." Shock moved quietly through the rows, like a wave no one wanted to admit. Zainab didn't look for them. She focused on the crowd in front of her. She spoke about building something from nothing, about learning skills when no one believes in you, about staying soft in a hard world. Her voice was steady, but every word came from somewhere deep. The room listened. Phones came out. People nodded. Some smiled. some swallowed hard. As she talked, memories passed through her mind. The nights in Oshodi, the floors she slept on, the scraps of paper with goals written in tired handwriting. She didn't mention pain by name, but it lived between her sentences. The audience felt it. That was why they leaned in closer. When she finished, the applause came fast and loud, not polite claps but standing ones. Zainab thanked them and stepped off the stage, her hands trembling now that it was over. In the hallway, she passed familiar faces who didn't know how to greet her. Some smiled too quickly. Some avoided her eyes. Respect had replaced judgment, and it looked awkward on them. Her name kept traveling that day. In conversations, on social media, in messages sent across cities. The same name that was once erased was now opening doors she never knocked on. Zainab sat alone for a moment, letting it all settle. She didn't feel proud in a loud way. She felt calm, complete. She realized then that success doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it just walks into rooms you were banned from and sits down like it belongs. And this time, no one could ask her to leave. The call came on a quiet afternoon. Zainab was at home, sitting near the window, working on her laptop when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. For a second she almost ignored it. Something in her chest tightened, like her body knew before her mind did. She answered slowly. "Hello." There was silence on the other end. Then a voice she hadn't heard in years. Softer, older. Her mother's voice. It shook as it spoke her name. Zainab. Just that. Nothing else. Zainab closed her eyes for a moment and listened. She noticed how calm she felt, which surprised her more than the call itself. "I heard about you," her mother said after a pause. "People are talking." She didn't say congratulations. She didn't say sorry. Her words carried curiosity, not regret. "They say you are doing well." Zainab replied politely. Short answers. No bitterness. No excitement. The girl who once begged to be understood was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned how to breathe through silence. Another pause. Then her mother cleared her throat. "Maybe we should meet," she said. The words sounded careful, like they might break. Just to talk. Still no apology. No acknowledgement of the door that was closed. Just an invitation wrapped in uncertainty. Zainab looked around her room. Her own space. Her own choices. Her own peace. She thought of the nights she cried alone, the floors she slept on, the years no one called to ask if she was alive. She also thought of how far she had come, and how little she needed now from the people who once defined her. "Okay," she said calmly. Her voice didn't shake. "We can meet." On the other end, her mother exhaled, like she had been holding her breath the whole time. Details were discussed. Place. Everything stayed polite, almost formal. When the call ended, Zainab placed her phone face down and sat quietly for a while. She didn't feel angry. She didn't feel excited. She felt ready. Not ready to beg. Not ready to explain herself. Just ready to show up as she was. Whole. Unbroken. No longer seeking permission. Zainab knew the meeting wouldn't erase the past. Some wounds don't close just because people are curious now. But agreeing to meet wasn't about them. It was about her choosing peace over pain, strength over silence. And this time, she wasn't walking back as the daughter who was erased. She was walking in as the woman they never thought they would have to call. The cafe in Bodija was quiet, clean, and carefully chosen. Zainab arrived early and sat near the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. When her parents walked in, she recognized them instantly, but they looked smaller than she remembered. Older, slower. They stopped when they saw her, as if unsure this calm woman was the same daughter they once pushed out. Her mother searched her face, maybe looking for anger, maybe for tears. Her father stood stiff like he was ready for a fight. Zainab smiled politely and stood up to greet them. No shaking voice. No folded arms. Just peace. Confused them. They sat down carefully, like people who didn't know the rules of the room. Conversation started awkwardly. Small talk about traffic, about the cafe, about the weather. Her mother kept staring at her hands, clean and steady. Her father cleared his throat again and again. Finally, he looked up at her and asked the question that had been sitting between them. How did you do it? His voice wasn't proud. It wasn't angry. It was tired. Zainab didn't rush to answer. She thought about the truth, not the version that would impress them but the one that mattered. I did it alone, she said gently. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Her parents shifted in their seats. She told them about Ashadi, about sleeping on floors, about working 2 jobs and crying quietly so no one would hear. She talked about learning digital marketing at night, about rejection emails, about the first client who believed in her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She just spoke, the way someone speaks when they are no longer asking to be understood. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Her father looked down at the table. For the first time they saw the cost of the decision they had made so easily. Zainab didn't stop. I stopped waiting for you to accept me, she said. That's when my life started moving. Silence followed, heavy but honest. Her father finally spoke again, his voice low. We thought you would come back, he said. We thought life would teach you. Zainab nodded. It did, she replied. Just not the lesson you expected. They didn't apologize. Not fully. Maybe they didn't know how. But something shifted. Respect replaced control. Curiosity replaced judgment. Zainab felt no need to fill the space. She had said enough. When they stood to leave, her mother reached for her hand. Zainab let her. It didn't erase the past, but it didn't reopen it either. As she walked out of the cafe alone, Zainab realized something important. She didn't come back to prove anything. She came back because she had already healed. After that meeting, things changed quietly the way deep things often do. Zainab went back to her life, her work, her peace. Her parents went back to Ibadan, but the house felt different now. Too quiet. Too full of thoughts they had avoided for years. For the first time, they were forced to sit with the truth of what they had done. Her mother replayed old memories in her head. Zainab as a child, asking questions, dreaming out loud, smiling without fear. She wondered when love turned into control, when guidance turned into punishment. At night, she lay awake thinking about the daughter who slept on floors while she slept on a bed. The thought made her chest ache in a way prayer could not fix. Her father faced a different kind of pain. In public, people spoke to him with new respect. Your daughter is impressive, they said. She is inspiring young people. They mentioned her name with pride, the same name he once erased. He nodded and thanked them, but every compliment felt like a quiet reminder of his mistake. He realized too late that authority is easy, but understanding takes effort. In the community, the story slowly shifted. Whispers turned into admiration. Church members shared her speeches online. Neighbors who once shook their heads now said, she was always smart. No one asked the parents how she had survived alone. No one asked who closed the door first. The respect they received felt borrowed, not earned. They tried to reach out more after that. Short messages, careful calls, invitations that sounded hopeful but unsure. Zainab replied kindly, but from a distance. Not out of anger but out of clarity. She had built a life without them, and pulling it apart again would cost too much. Her parents began to understand something painful. They hadn't just lost years. They had lost a version of their daughter they would never get back. The girl who needed approval. The girl who would explain herself again and again. That daughter stayed behind the night the door closed. Regret settled in slowly. It showed up in empty chairs at family gatherings. In questions they couldn't ask out loud. In moments when they wished they had listened instead of judged. But regret has a cruel rule. It arrives only after lessons are learned, when there is nothing left to fix. Time didn't reverse. Success didn't rewind the past. And Zainab didn't return to fill the space they had created. She had forgiven them in her own way, but forgiveness did not mean surrender. Some lessons come too late to change the outcome. Zainab's parents learned theirs when their daughter no longer needed them. And that was the quiet punishment they would live with, the knowledge that love, once denied, does not always wait for regret to catch up. Zainab signed the investment deal on a quiet morning. No cameras, no crowd, Just her, a pen, and a calm heart. The numbers were big, but her hands didn't shake anymore. Money had stopped being a dream and started becoming a tool. Not to impress anyone, not to prove a point, but to build something that would last beyond her. One of the first things she did was fund a training program for girls like the younger version of herself. Girls with ideas that people laughed at. Girls told to be quiet, patient, and realistic. She gave them skills, mentors, and time. She didn't promise them success. She promised them choice. Watching them learn, ask questions, and believe in themselves healed something deep inside her. Then she did something very personal, very intentional. Zainab changed her last name legally. Not because she was running from her past, but because she was choosing her future. The name she picked belonged to her alone. It wasn't taken. It wasn't borrowed. It was claimed. For the first time, her identity was not tied to approval or rejection. People asked if she would return home now, if she would reconcile fully, if success had softened her. Zainab smiled and gave simple answers. She had forgiven. Truly, forgiveness had freed her from anger. But returning was a different thing. Returning would mean shrinking, and she was done with that. She had learned something important. Some doors close to protect your growth. Some families lose you because they refuse to see who you are becoming. And sometimes, leaving is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. Zainab stood in her own space one evening, looking out at the city lights, thinking about how far she had come. She didn't feel revenge. She felt peace. They disowned me to punish me. Life promoted me to teach them. And success didn't bring me back, set me free.